Academic records, I don't have to say much in detail, but he has a master's degree in sociology from The Hague, and he did PhD from Amsterdam University, Netherlands, in economics. And he, most importantly, he worked with Professor Tinbergen. He is a Nobel laureate, and as you all know that Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan, affectionately called PKG, he has occupied many important roles in our Kerala state government, and he was also a special secretary to Planning and Economic Affairs Department during a period 74 to 80. So this is the brief background of Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan. In his name, we have conducting this memorial lecture. And most importantly, we got a very eminent speaker to give this lecture today, Professor Suresh Babu. He is the director of Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai. He has a vast experience in the teaching as well as in the research and policy experience in diverse areas. His area of specializations are, which I understand, in applied microeconomics, industrial economics and developmental economics. In addition to his research bringing a long experience of engaging with policy advice at various levels in center as well as in state governments. And prior to joining the developmental in studies in Chennai, he was a professor at IIT Madras, and I came to know that he is on a deputation to all these institutes. And before that, he was also in ISAC Bangalore and CDS Trivandrum and Gogole Institute, Pune. He was a visiting professor in various universities outside India as well. Professor Suresh Babu has a PhD in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. So on behalf of the 38th Science Congress Organizing Committee, I cordially invite Professor Suresh Babu to deliver Dr. PKG Memorial Lecture. You are welcome, please, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon. I thank the organizers, especially Professor K.P. Sudhir, for giving me this opportunity to be here today for this very important lecture for two reasons. One, I never had the privilege of meeting Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan, but I've had many occasions to know about his works, A. B. I also had many occasions to listen to his endowment lecture, which was instituted at the Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum, where I was a student. And we all immensely benefited from such lectures because these were delivered by towering personalities of our times. And C, very importantly, he did his PhD from Netherlands with Jan Tinbergen, a highly respected economist whose work has profound influence on a lot of developing economies, including India. So thank you very much. It is indeed a privilege and an honor for me to deliver this lecture. When I was thinking what I should speak on, and when I was discussing with Professor Sudhir, he told me only one line that, there should be some kind of a policy, technology angle to what we are going to speak. And as an economist who really is here to deliver this lecture on a Sunday, hot afternoon, 2:30, I thought that I would use this occasion to provoke your thoughts on a theme which all of us are discussing. Perhaps it is not a theme, it is a dream of India being a developed economy by 2047. Why I say it is a dream? Well, you will come to know. I think some of the suspense of the lecture is already out because the slides were already put. But it is a very kind of a long journey that we are embarking towards this whole, Vikasit Bharat or developed country status. Now, just a couple of introductory remarks. What is this Vikasit Bharat? Well, we are still grappling to find out what it is, although there are a lot of discussions on that. But we need to have a working definition of what it is. Yeah, and I know as scientists, you will be more keen to have very precise definitions of concepts. But as economists, we would like to have at least a working definition of what this Vikasit Bharat means. And that's a big challenge. And unless and until we define what we want to achieve, our journey is incomplete. We won't be able to achieve. So the first task then is to define what is this whole thing about Vikasit Bharat or the dream that we are actually embarking upon. One. Second, when we are starting a journey, we also need to understand the kind of a road that we have to take towards this. And the road that we have to take is a very difficult road. Though we talk about, 2047, it's not very far now. Yeah. And time is just moving fast. Uncertainties are increasing day by day. Global geopolitical order is changing day by day. Given all these changes in the context and the milieu, it becomes very difficult for us to take the road which we want to have for a developed country status. Okay, so let me start with a very rudimentary or a working definition of what we really plan to achieve. I was looking for some definitions in terms of what is the official thinking about this, but it's very difficult to find an official definition because there are so many discussions around it without any clear definition. I would say that Vikasit Bharat at 2047 is not just about higher GDP. It is a project in terms of being inclusive, being sustainable, and high quality development. All easily said than done, all these terms that I am using. But the starting or the building block for such a journey is to achieve higher per capita incomes. Now let me elaborate that. What is this higher per capita income? That is higher income for each and every individual in an economy. Consider the economy as a cake, and if we share the cake equally, what will each individual get? Now, India's per capita income at the moment is around 2,500, 2,700 US dollars. World Bank's definition of a high income economy is around $12,500 to $13,000. And that's the journey that I'm talking about. From 2,500 US dollars to 12,500 to 13,000 US dollars we have to reach. And we have 22 years time, right? Now, this is a very simple calculation that we can do. You have an endpoint in terms of data and you have the present kind of per capita incomes. You can put it in an Excel sheet and then compute what is the growth rate that is required. And my crude calculations show that India needs to achieve around 8%, 7.5 to 8% growth rate year on, every year for the next 22 years if we have to achieve this so-called Vikasit Bharat. Please remember, no economy in the world has ever done this consecutively for more than 2 decades. But we are dreaming, that's why I say it is a dream. Government's calculations show that if you have around 6.5 to 7% rate of growth, that is enough for reaching this level. Yeah? Let us take that as a conservative kind of an estimate. And if we have around 6.5 to 7%, maybe we might become a developed country. And the definition of developed country is achieving a per capita income of 12,500 US dollars. That is, from 2,500, we will reach to 12,500 US dollars. But the challenge is that we will have to move from a consumption-led to an investment and a productivity-led growth that we are having. At the moment, the growth is basically consumption-led. We have a large market. Yeah? Our population is our strength. And the consumption of households in this large market is what is driving growth at the moment. That will hit a plateau beyond which we cannot push that. After that, we have to have growth we really need to have higher investments, and that is where new technologies come. We also need to have higher productivity, and that is where new technologies need to come. We are talking about AI and other kind of, productivity enhancing technologies. So we will have to make this transition from a consumption economy to a production economy, and that is a big challenge that we will have to encounter. But the picture is very rosy now, and I will just roll out some numbers which are again very conservative estimates, not very high levels of estimates. Well, at the moment, that is 25, 26, India is the fastest growing, largest economy in the world. And that's a matter of great optimism, definitely. Yeah. India's rate of growth is way higher than the other economies. Yeah. For example, China's growth rate has actually coming down. Yeah. Whereas India is steady, above 6%. United States is really hovering around, 2.5 to 3% rate of growth. United Kingdom, especially after the, Brexit, exit from the European Union, it's again, up and down. Germany is growing slowly. Japan is growing slowly. So India seems to be the fastest growing economy, and that's a very, very positive kind of a thing. And that is giving us this kind of a courage to dream big. Again, if you look at the G20 economies, yeah, and I'm putting G20 because we were having the G20 presidency until recently, and among that also India is the fastest growing economy. Yeah. So on the whole, when we look at the growth front, India seems to be very well poised. The other important factor that is giving us some kind of a courage to look at this growth rates is that the global epicenter of growth has shifted. Yeah, earlier, global growth was driven by the Europe and the Americas, but now it is Asia that is driving global growth. Yeah, and we find that 60% of global economic growth is from Asia now, and we are a large economy in Asia. So a large portion of global growth comes from India now. Yeah, and that again is a very, very important kind of impetus for us to think about a developed country status. Now, against this backdrop, we now think about 2047. But then 2047, if we have to move to a high income economy status, we need to have a lot of building blocks for this. And we have to get this right. Then only we can think of even coming anyway close to this target. One, I would say that there are 5 building blocks that we need to think about. Yeah? And all these are having reverse causation. It's not a unidirectional causal relationship that I'm talking about. We need to look at social development and human capital, and I'll start with that. And we also need to look at a modern infrastructure and urbanization. In fact, I was just listening to today's budget speech of Finance Minister. A lot of push for Tier 2 cities. Tier 2 cities is now a thrust area, and it is identified as the growth centers. But that is only the beginning. A long way to go in that. Livable cities are very important. Manufacturing sector, again this budget sets out with manufacturing. In fact, I have never heard a budget speech starting with the manufacturing sector. This is the first time that we are hearing that manufacturing sector is given such a thrust. Innovation and jobs, and that is where the scientific community has to help in terms of, getting India on a higher technological path. We also need to have governance, institution, and the digital state. The digital state is a half work done. We have a lot of digital public goods that have created, but then that also has to move to the next level. But more importantly, something that is staring us at this moment is the question of climate resilience and sustainability. And if we are not able to have climate resilient infrastructure and production systems, including agriculture, perhaps our targets can never be achieved. So I would say these are the 5 building blocks on which we have to think about such a project. Please remember, it's a project that we are thinking about. Yeah? It's not a mission that we can undertake and go. Right? Now, what are the weak links in all these things, and where we can actually think about policy interventions and some kind of technological interventions, especially to eminent scientists like you? One, we need to improve the access in terms of quality education and healthcare. Now I am using a very important term in between. Access to quality education and healthcare. Access to education, perhaps we have done quite a bit now, and we have done quite well in terms of that. But the word quality is very important now, because we are moving from one level to another level. Healthcare is also very important in such a way, and that is where technologies really play an important role. We also need to think of eliminating extreme poverty and multidimensional deprivation, and then that is where Kerala has taken a big step in terms of eradicating extreme poverty. But Kerala is only a small portion of this large population of India. There are other states which are really stare at extreme poverty. So the focus then in terms of policy has to be on nutrition, skill development, and women's labor force participation. And it is a matter of concern that in India, women's labor force participation is still very low. We are only comparable to African economies, and no economy in the world has grown without more women entering into the labor market. So that is one set of issues. But then if you look at infrastructure, we have another set of issues. Yeah, transport, logistics, energy, whole lot of issues in terms of improving the existing infrastructure. There has been a concerted effort in the last few budgets to push up infrastructure, but that is where we need to have better technologies, because this project's execution as well as delivery is taking a lot of time. And if there is a long delay in terms of conceptualizing and executing a project, then perhaps there is also cost overruns which are huge for the economy. When we are talking about urbanization, three important issues come up from a science policy angle. Well, affordable housing. Well, we have a lot of schemes from Indira Awas Yojana to Prime Minister's housing scheme, where the affordability becomes a problem because there is only a small fraction of that cost of the house that is given by the government. The other fraction still has to be met by the beneficiary, and that runs into difficulty. So that is where we need better technologies. Clean water and sanitation, always a problem. And I fear that, over time, the quality of water has deteriorated. Sanitation is a problem in our cities. That leads us to the big challenge of, creating livable, sustainable cities. Well, so these are one set of issues when we talk about the ease of living. But then there is also a lot of issues in terms of doing businesses in India. And one of the things that we really need to push is to raise manufacturing share in the total output to 25%. And here we should also recollect that in 2015, we had a program called the Make in India program. And the vision of Make in India program was by 2025 to have a manufacturing sector that is 25% of GDP. But we still are way below that. Manufacturing still accounts to 14 to 15%, and the best performance was only 17% of our GDP. So by 2025, we wanted to reach there, we have missed it, but we need to have a very strong impetus on that. For jobs, our MSMEs and startups are the very important thing. Kerala has made very important steps in terms of the startup ecosystem, but we need to have a system where all these are connected to large-scale R&D and innovation. And that is very, very important in terms of employment generation as well as in terms of increasing industrial output. We also need to look at the kind of a relationship between the central government as well as the state government here, because a lot of these plans are conceived at the center but implemented by the states, right? And once when we don't have a coordination between the center and the states, these plans remain as plans. They won't move forward. So we need to think about the spirit of cooperative federalism, where the central and the state governments work together in terms of achieving a mission. And finally, we need to have a balance between development and environmental protection. Development cannot come at the cost of environment. Such a development is not sustainable development. And that is what the works of, Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan and all really emphasize, that development has to be embedded with the local nature. If we deviate from that, it is going to be difficult. And there are three challenges that we face there. That is the transition to green growth pathway, where our industries need to move to green energy transition, very important. We also need to expand the renewable energy. I was just looking at the budget announcements and I was very curious to see that data centers will be given tax concession till 2047. Yeah. I have not seen in the history that tax concession have been extended for 22 years so far. Generally, tax concessions are only for 5 years. So that is also aligned with this whole thinking about Vikasit Bharat and 2047. And please remember, these data centers are energy intensive data centers. So we need to look at renewable energy as an important kind of a thing. And more importantly, if we are talking about Bharat, we also need to look at climate resilient agriculture, because agriculture still is the backbone of our rural economy. Yeah? So a lot of challenges in terms of the scientific community to really think about and to have a kind of a long-standing contribution towards this journey. But let me point out some of the challenges. Why are we in a hurry in terms of 2047? Yeah? 22 years, yes, but we are in a hurry for 2-3 reasons. One, at the moment we have what is called a demographic dividend. That is, India has the largest working age population in the world, more than China. And this demographic dividend, if we are not tapping, then that would become a demographic disaster. And that is very difficult for any society to survive, because if our youth are not able to find meaningful jobs, then our growth is not sustainable. So before that window actually closes, we need to move into the next level of growth. Second, that also opens up a window to move from a middle income to a high income status, because there is a problem of what we call as a middle income trap. Yeah? If you look at the growth trajectory of economies around the world, in 1960s, there were some economies that were trying to move to high income growth. But out of that, around 66 economies are still trapped in the middle income. They have not been able to move up at all. We call it as a middle income trap. And if we cannot escape this middle income trap, then we are doomed. We are in that for a long period of time. Yeah? So, for these 3 reasons, it is very important that we dream of this project and we need to really accomplish this project by 2047. Okay. Now, what is the economic outlook? Then I'll come to the social outlook. Economic outlook, real GDP growth or output growth is very fast. I showed you the numbers earlier. Yeah. We touched 8.2%, and that was the estimate that I was talking, more than 8%. In 24-25, it was estimated at 7%, but we have crossed that. Yeah, we have crossed to 7.2%, phenomenal. Our GDP was at 3.7 trillion in 2024. In 2025, we have crossed 4 trillion. Please remember, we are now the 4th largest economy in the world, and we have overtaken Japan. Yeah, but that is no means a comparison between India and Japan. Yeah, it is just the size of the economy that we are talking about. In no other parameter we can compare. But still, the sheer size is very, very big as far as India is concerned. We will become a 5 trillion economy by 27-28 was our target, but I am a little pessimistic about that. By 2030-31 only we will be able to become that. At the moment, if you decompose global growth, 16% of incremental global growth actually comes from India. And that is quite substantial. Yeah? So of the total global growth, 16% is India's contribution. So things are favorable at the moment, and it is here that we need to act now. Demography, I talked about demography. Demography is very important because at the moment 67% of the total population in India is in the age group of 15 to 64. That is what we define as the working age group. Yeah? In fact, now post 65 people are coming back to work in Europe. Yeah? Because silver economy is becoming very, very important. But we have a large percentage, 67%. If you look at the median age in India, in terms of population, is 28 years. And for China, they have crossed that to 39 years. OECD is 42. And if you go to Europe, it is still depressing because you can see only aged people. Right? So, that is a big advantage for us. There's a lot of youth population with energy that is available. Urban population is 36%, which is expected to increase to 40%. Our consumption is enormous because 60% of our GDP comes from consumption. That shows that India is a large market. Rising middle class, 300 million people expected to double by 2047. When I say middle class, who have moved to a certain level of incomes, they have crossed the threshold from low income to a middle income, which means that there is growing demand for housing, automobiles, consumer durables and services. So, demographic and domestic demand seems to be very strong. There is also a lot of infrastructure push. Investment rates have increased. 11.1 lakh crore investments in infrastructure. There is a national infrastructure pipeline, and that is where a lot of scientific inputs have to go now, because we are running short of ideas how we can actually enhance that pipeline, right? Rapid expansion in infrastructure both in road and highways, right? We also find that there is a lot of need in terms of renewable energy, which I was talking about. So on the whole, we found that there is a strong domestic demand, public capital expenditure and services sectors are booming. But this is a weak link that I was talking about, manufacturing sector in India. What we are doing is basically we are incentivizing industrial production through what is known as a production linked incentives or PLI. And that is a subsidy. Now, a subsidy given for profit-making enterprises is slightly unethical, because you are actually subsidizing someone to make profits. But India is perhaps one of the very few countries who are doing that. And that is because industrialization has not moved. Some bright spots, right? We see in electronics manufacturing has increased. Automotives, especially EVs, and I have to say that because I come from Chennai, there is a lot of change that we find in terms of automotive production. Chennai is the Detroit of the South. Pharmaceutical is an area where we have been able to export drugs and pharmaceuticals to close to 170 countries in the world. And services is in another area where we find that software as well as business services have really grown. But what are the risks? We are actually facing uncertainty. As economists, we say that we have entered into a period of extended uncertainty. Generally, periods of uncertainty are short. But now we have entered into a period of extended uncertainty, and we know that Mr. Trump can do anything at any time. The tariff wars, the kind of, pulling down of multilateral institutions like the WTO, WHO, all these are becoming very, very difficult. And in fact, US wants to come out of WHO, and it is saying that, we have contributed a lot to WHO, now please return us those things. So that's the kind of a global uncertainty that we are talking about. Employment generation in India is lagging output growth. When I was showing these figures of 8% output growth, employment growth rate is not corresponding. Jobs are less. So there is a problem there. And please remember that we have a huge working age population, right? A lot of reforms, but most of these reforms are in terms of corrective measures. We already did some damage earlier. Now we are undoing this damage. It's not reform of that kind which will actually accelerate growth. Reforms of the kind that we are undoing some kind of a damage. GST is something like that. When we were talking about GST, initially in 2017-18, it was supposed to be what is known as a good simple tax, GST. But instead of that, it was not good. It was not simple because there were so many slabs in that, and the tax rates also very high. It was a very complicated kind of a thing. Now we are reforming that, and then we say that we are reforming, right? There is still no insolvency code here. That is, if I start an enterprise and if I make losses, I cannot exit immediately. There are a lot of regulatory mechanisms through which I have to go. It is not at all simple, right? So a lot of issues that are coming up are in terms of this kind of regulatory systems as well as government machinery. Let me talk about a couple of challenges that we really face now. One, the question of jobs. And the question of jobs is of paramount importance because when you look at the data on jobs in India, there is a category which is actually growing, and that category is called NEET. NEET. That is neither in employment, education or training. Yeah, not the neat medical entrance thing, right? Neither in employment, nor in education, nor in training. So where are they? And that's a worry, right? If you are not in employment, you should be in either education or you should be doing some training. Yeah. If you are not in employment, not in training, not in education, then there is a problem. The percentage of youth, especially in the age group of 22 to 26 in NEET is actually increasing. And that's a big kind of a challenge. And when you have such a challenge, the demographic dividend, which I was glorifying until in a few minutes ago, could actually turn out to be a demographic burden. And that is where we need some kind of a strategy to generate jobs. Manufacturing and services need to generate more jobs. And that is happening on one side. But on the other side, please remember, India has many Indias. It is not one India, right? The southern part of India, we have a problem that there is a question of aging. So on certain parts of India, youth population is more, but on certain other parts of India, aged population is more. Now we have to think about a care economy where the aged population has to be taken care of. Yeah. So employment and demographic transition then becomes a huge challenge, and that will create a big kind of a problem unless we don't address it. Second issue, when we talk about this journey to 2047 is human capital and skills. Remember, I talked about access to education. Access to education, we have already crossed a big milestone. But access to quality education is becoming a problem. For a very simple reason that there is very, very uneven kind of learning outcomes across regions and certain social groups. When I say learning outcomes, well, there is an agency which conducts this test on learning outcome called ASER, A-S-E-R, and it is done by an agency called Pratham. Every year when ASER's result come, we get this shocking news that a 7th standard student cannot read and write what is supposed to be known in 3rd standard. So that's the gap. So the student is actually studying in 7th standard, but cannot read and write what is to be supposed to be known in 3rd standard. And when this report comes in public domain, government goes into a panic mode and they will counter this saying that the measurement is wrong, all these kind of things. They will constitute another test, but all these are escaping, right? There is a problem that we find in terms of very simple thing, that is foundational literacy, numeracy and digital skills. Yeah, what we call as FLM, foundational literacy and numeracy. So earlier we were talking about literacy, right? But now we are in a danger in terms of losing numeracy. So what is this numeracy? I remember when I was a small child, when we go to the shops to buy certain things, for example vegetables, and we ask for a piece of pumpkin or whatever it is, they will cut it and it will not be exactly half kilo. The shopkeeper used to be very, very sharp and smart, and if it is 650 grams, he used to calculate the price and say that this is the price. But now, without a calculator or without a kind of a mobile phone, people don't know to calculate. Numeracy skills are vanishing. Now the counter to this narrative, someone can tell me that, well, we don't need to do that because we have machines. Yes, but please remember, when we are talking about data science, when we are talking about high-end artificial intelligence, which involves a lot of large language models and things of that sort, mathematics and numeracy becomes very, very important. And if that becomes a weak link, we cannot even think of moving ahead in terms of this kind of large projects that we conceive. There is also a problem in terms of a skill mismatch between education and labor market needs. Yeah. Recently we were doing some study in the industrial belt in Chennai, 3.45 p.m. And when I was talking to these manufacturing units, they were telling me that, they need only diploma people. But interestingly, when I look at Tamil Nadu's, engineering college seats, they have around 2.45 lakh engineering college seats. And polytechnic and diploma seats are very less, 1.3 lakhs. So what is going to happen is that there is a lot of engineers getting produced and they do the job of ITIs and diploma and they get paid for that. And that's a mismatch. In fact, some of these jobs, they don't need BTech degree. They need only ITI. Yeah, we find it very difficult to get a good plumber. I don't know what is the situation here. We don't find a good electrician, but we have BTech people coming and selling in Swiggy and Zomato, whatever we order, late nights. Yeah, they're all BTech MBAs sometimes. So there is a skill mismatch between education and labor market. And that is because our curriculum is not trained to the demands of what is actually required in terms of the labor market. And very importantly, when we are talking about AI and other big technologies that are coming, we should prepare the next generation for lifelong learning and future ready skills. Yeah? We are in a state of mind where learning stops at a particular point. But the new technologies actually push us to a system where we need to have continuous learning. It should be lifelong. And our educational system needs then to address these challenges. This takes us to a very important issue, that is the kind of a change that the economy is seeing. We still are dependent on low productive agriculture. Yeah? A survey conducted by the Reserve Bank shows that in agriculture, 42% of the people want to exit agriculture. Why? Because low earnings, low productivity. And what they want is also, 68% of them told that we don't want our next generation to be in agriculture. So imagine a situation where 48% exit and 62% don't want the next generation to be in agriculture. What are we going to do with agriculture? Agriculture in India has become a particular sector where aged women are working. Yeah? Young people don't want to enter there. Young women also don't want to enter there. Now, this is giving rise to a kind of a problem of low productive agriculture. Now, from the movement to agriculture, then it should be basically to industry. But instead of that, what is happening is that from low productive agriculture, people are moving to low productive services. And when I say low productive services, please don't mistake me. One example is our celebrated gig economy, right? All this Zomato and all these people who are selling. Because, these are jobs where there is no upward mobility. If you work for 5 years, you still be a delivery boy. There is no possibility of upskilling or upward mobility. And that is exactly the situation in agriculture. If you are a farmer, you are a lifelong farmer. So, what is actually happening is that our people who are moving out of agriculture end up in cities and towns, and they end up in low productive service sector jobs. And that is a kind of a dangerous trend. So the slow movement of labor to high productivity sectors is a bottleneck which we need to address then. Right. And finally, we also need to think about inequality and social inclusion. That is a challenge. I'll show you some numbers towards the end. But still, if you look at the World Inequality Report, we find that India is one of those economies where inequality is the highest in the world. And we can have debates about how we are measuring it, wealth, income, what is the indicator and things of that sort. Whatever may be the indicator, we find that compared to Latin America, when I say Latin America, Brazil, Mexico and Argentina, inequality in India is growing, because Latin America was the region where inequality was the highest. But now India is overtaking this Latin America, which means that the benefits of this growth is uneven. It is distributed only in certain pockets. I'm sure there's no one from Hyderabad, but I would like to bring an example from Hyderabad. You get down at Hyderabad airport and you drive to the city, you will know that it's a totally different kind of a world. Yeah? 45-storied buildings, and you can see that whether this is India, Microsoft Office, huge kind of buildings. But we can find that you move out of Hyderabad, well, it is again low productive agriculture. So there is a large problem in terms of uneven development. What it leads to is lack of social cohesion. There will be groups of people who are deprived of many things. That will create social unrest. And if social unrest is growing in certain parts, then economic growth cannot take place. We call it as what is known as a tunnel effect. That is, imagine that there is a tunnel and there is a lane that is going out and we are stuck inside the tunnel because of a traffic block, right? and then suddenly we find that one lane is slowly started to move. The immediate reaction of people will be that everyone will get into that lane. Then what happens? That lane also will get choked. No one can move out. Typical, problem of railway gate opening, no? The moment we open a railway gate, everyone wants to go, but no one can't go because everyone is choking there. And that happens to social progress when we have uneven development. And that is why inequality and social inclusion is so important. I talked about urbanization, so I'll skip this. I talked about environmental sustainability, I'll stick this. Manufacturing also I talked about. Finally, fiscal capacity and state capability, and this is very important. What happens is that, well, today the budget has been presented. Yeah, some of you, when you have some time, should look at the budget in terms of what is the announcement and what is the actual thing. So budget is an announcement. So there will be an outlay. For example, 1,000 crores will be spent on this particular thing. Now, look at last year. Last year's numbers would have come in today's budget. And there we find that there is a gap between announcement and actual expenditure. That shows the incapacity of the state to spend. So you have big announcements that are coming, but actual expenditure remains very low, which means that our capacity to think, conceive big projects itself is limited. Yeah. For example, I was looking at National Electronics Mission. Yeah. MATE's large kind of a projects. 25,000 crores were set aside, but we could actually spend only 15,000 crores. Why? Because our capacity to really think about, futuristic technologies is also bound, and that is what we call as the state capacity. Unless we have this, enhancement of state capacity, we cannot think of this mega projects which can take us. Well, this is a risk factor which you know better than me. We are moving to an era of AI. There is unequal access to digital infrastructure. There is also the risk of exclusion, due to automation and AI. The only thing that I find is very difficult is to correct the essays and term papers of students because they all use ChatGPT now. So now we have to have a software not only to detect plagiarism but also to detect ChatGPT and other things. Of course, after a point we can make out because the language will be quite flowery and easily teachers can make out what a student can write. But the point is that, so there are these kind of new technologies that are coming. On one hand, some of these can raise productivity, but on the other hand, there is a lot of exclusion that happens because of these kind of technologies. So we need to have an inclusive approach in terms of this digital transformation that we are talking about. I talked about this federal coordination and the governance structure. Now, this is the global setting that I was talking, right? Large percentage, I'm sorry the graph is not very clear. Large percentage of global output is still among 4 or 5 economies. Yeah. The red is the rest of the world. Others are all small countries. So the point that I want to emphasize is that we are actually facing an uneven world. And it is in this uneven world that we are thinking about an economy which is developed and which is going to have $12,500 per capita income. One. Second, remember I talked about extended periods of uncertainty now. Well, PricewaterhouseCoopers conducts this survey every year where they ask 4,500 CEOs across 95 countries this very particular question that how will you grapple with uncertain growth opportunities? Now we find that growing number of CEOs, they find it very difficult to grapple with uncertainties, which means that there's a kind of a pessimism that is coming. They don't know how to grapple with uncertainties now. And from 2007 survey, that's the first time when they launched, to 2025, you can see the difference in the colors and the industrial leaders themselves are struggling. I want to end with 2 points. One on growth rates that I've been talking about, that India is growing and things of that sort. Please remember, when we are talking about growth rates, I know scientists know it better than us, there is a base effect. What is the base on which you are growing is to be very important. If the base itself is low, the growth rate will be magnified, right? So when we look at growth rates per se, perhaps the country that is growing fastest or highest is Sudan. Sudan actually has 24% rate of growth. Why? Because suddenly Sudan has got into exporting some oil because of the global geopolitical uncertainties that we are talking about. So the point that I want to emphasize is that we also need to look at levels. Yeah, in India there is so much of discussion about growth rates, and we say that we are really fastest growing. All that is fine, but the levels are also very important. For America, 1% growth rate is more than enough because they have already reached a high level. But for India, where the base is very low, 10% or 11% growth rate is very important to come closer. One. Two, I was talking about inequality, and I'll end with this. We also have a situation where when we are growing at 8%, inequality is also growing. For the period, 2008 to 2023, yeah, Global Wealth Report 2024 gives this data. We find that inequality in India has worsened. And this is a very simple calculation of what we call as a Gini index. And in Gini index, we know that 0 is total equality and 100 is absolute inequality. And India's score is 73. And India's inequality has increased by 16.2%, right? Which means that if we are growing fast, we also need to reckon with the fact that there is also inequality, which means that there is deprivation, and that is the kind of social cohesion that I was talking to. Right, then I'll stop here. Well, what is this Vikasit Bharat then we are talking about? This Vikasit Bharat then should be a kind of a vision for prosperity with dignity, very important, because this 8% or 8.5% is rate of growth. If it is coming without dignity of people living there, then those numbers does not matter. Economic growth also has to be matched by social justice. Exclusion should be minimal. Very strong institutions. Institutions are important, and that is where now we have a challenge in building durable and robust institutions. Yeah, I'm sure all of you are aware of Indian Statistical Institute, which was built many decades back, which is the cornerstone of national statistical system now. Yeah, Professor Mahalanobis, with that vision at that point in time, thought that statistics is very important for democracy to thrive, which aligned with the Nehruvian vision. So such an institution built on certain strong fundamentals serves as an important kind of a body for an economy now. So that's why we need very strong institutions. And to cap it up, we also now have to seriously think about environmental sustainability. Otherwise, we'll be ending up in a situation where we are actually making one step forward but two steps backward. So I'll stop here, and I'll be happy if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
I know that this was very interesting talk, and there will be lot of thought-provoking ideas here, I suppose. And due to lack of time, I feel like we can have discussion maybe off the stage. That may be much more convenient because many people can directly interact with you. So with that, I would like to conclude, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Suresh Babu, for that insightful lecture. I now call upon Professor Sabu, Member Secretary of Kerala State Council for Science, Technology and Environment, and the General Convener of the 38th Kerala Science Congress, to deliver a token of our appreciation in the form of a memento. I also call Dr. M. Suresh Babu, Director, Madras Institute of Developmental Studies, to accept the memento.
Thank you, sir. As we come to the close of this memorial lecture, may I invite Dr. Harinarayanan P., Senior Principal Scientist, Kerala State Council for Science, Technology and Environment, to propose the word of thanks.
Good evening, one and all. Respected Dr. M. Suresh Babu, the Director of Madras Institute of Development Studies, Dr. K. Rajendran, Director, Institute of Climate Change Studies, dignitaries of the dais, Professor S. Abu, Member Secretary of KSCST. Indeed, we had a 40 minutes of economic lecture, actually, in memory of Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan, who has, Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan has led or planned the institutions in Kerala, all the R&D institutions in Kerala, which started in 70s. He was the person who has actually which has brought it forward. Now, in the memorial lecture, which was delivered by Dr. Suresh Babu, he had a provoking talk about and he has included the need of inclusive, sustainable and high quality development for a Vikasit Bharat. He has pointed on certain important inclusions and exclusions and what transition is required, what transformation is required, and where we need to be, and how India has to go within the next 22 years to become Vikasit Bharat. So it was an excellent lecture by Dr. Suresh Babu on behalf of Kerala State Council for Science, Technology and Environment and the Kerala State Science and Congress Committee. I acknowledge his vision and also the talk. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us. I also thank Dr. Rajendran K., who is the Director of the Institute of Climate Change Studies, for introducing the speaker and also welcoming the gathering. I thank Professor Isabu for providing a beautiful memento as a souvenir or gift for delivering this wonderful lecture. Thank you, sir. I also thank all the delegates here, including the Executive Vice President of KSCST and all other dignitaries of the dais. Thank you very much. Thank you once again. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Harinarayanan. We will now proceed for the poster presentations across different science zones, requesting everyone to kindly join back here at 7 p.m. for the cultural programs. Thank you. Students, please note, those who have not yet registered for the lectures will have the opportunity for a spot registration. A QR code will be available at the registration desk. E-certificates will be provided for the same.